Welcome to Inside the Corner Office, a podcast where you will be taken behind the scenes of the daily life of a CEO. I'm Thomas Buberl, CEO of AXA. In each episode of this podcast, we will delve into a specific aspect of this role. You will see that making decisions from an office is definitely not what this job is all about. For every topic, we'll be joined by a leader of a major organization. I hope you will enjoy these discussions. Tune in and take a seat at the table. We are inside the Corner Office. Welcome back to the next episode of Inside the Corner Office. I thought it would be interesting today to exchange with a leader who has been a CEO and is now in the public sector. Welcome, Dorin Recean, who is the Prime Minister of the Republic of Moldova since February 2023. You have a very interesting career because you started as a lecturer and developed then extensive experience in the private sector, in the tech industry, with a specialization in data and information analysis. As a Prime Minister, you are a very experienced politician because you have served as Deputy Minister for Information and Communication Technology as well as Interior Minister from 2012 to 2015. In 2022, you were appointed Secretary of the Supreme Security Council, advisor to the President on security issues. Moldova is strategically located, certainly very close to the difficult area of Ukraine today, a candidate for EU membership with very rich opportunities when it comes to innovation, expansion, and long-term growth. So thank you very much, Dorin, for being with us today. And let me start with a simple question. Do you remember the first time we met? Because it's not such a long time ago.
Thomas, thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming to Moldova. And it's only a few months that passed since we met in Davos. And World Economic Forum is one of the most intellectually rewarding experiences. And I'm very happy that you were curious to come to Moldova and to see the wonderful Moldova and the wonderful opportunities for both the people, but also the businesses.
Exactly. I mean, look, I had the pleasure of learning already a lot from you about Moldova, but maybe describe what are the current challenges that you're facing?
Look, the biggest challenge is the fact that we are very next door to the Russian war in Ukraine. Nevertheless, we are a safe country. Russia cannot reach us militarily. Our primary objective is to ensure peace and security, but also to create opportunities for the economic development. Currently, we have agreed with the European Union an economic growth facility. It's called Growth Plan. It is backed up by 1.9 billion euros investments for both reforming agenda, but also investment. And this is putting our country on a steady path toward EU integration.
That is very good. And you also recently showed a lot of resilience because you had to manage a very difficult conflict in one of the provinces, Transnistrian. How did you do that? And what was the recipe for success there?
Look, even though Russia cannot reach us militarily, thanks to Ukraine and to Ukrainians' courage and lives, but also to support of the friends of Ukraine, Russia wages a full spectrum of hybrid war. It is trying to destabilize the country, trying to induce conflict between the mainland and the Transnistrian region where Russia stations illegally military troops. What we do is to make sure that we align the objectives of everyone in the country along this peace objective. And through targeted programs, we achieve it. And correspondingly, it's very important to have both instruments of constraint and instruments of incentives in order to make sure that peace and security is here. And I would remind once again that we have to also take care about the economy.
Exactly, and certainly your tech background has helped you a lot as well to manage this conflict. Let's talk a little bit about your background as a CEO, because it's very rare that you see a CEO going into politics and also being successful in politics, because it's probably a very different playing field. So when you think about your time as a CEO, what did you learn in leadership that you can benefit from today?
Look, in my business, it's very important to focus on customer experience. And this is very important for the government as well. And I think this is the transformation that the government should do, to treat the citizens as stakeholders, to treat the businesses as stakeholders, and to understand that these are your partners. And then you have to design your policies in such a way as to create opportunities for these people. In government, obviously, it's a little bit more diverse, and the stakeholders are of different nature. In business, you have the bottom line, and then you balance it with the customer needs, customer satisfaction, but also employee needs and employees' satisfaction. In the government, the objectives are of a larger nature, but also there is a lot of political pressure from different stakeholders, from different groups. And it takes more of communication, it takes more data in order to properly target the needs with the policies. In business, you are constrained by the resources. In government, even more.
And also in business, there is a hierarchy, whereas in government, it's difficult to create the same hierarchy. How did you manage around that?
This is about talking to the people, understanding through their needs, understanding through their motivations, and in such a way as to organize the other political leaders and ministers who are political appointees to, again, take care of the stakeholders they are called in to serve. Again, it's very important to have all these people aligned around the values and around the strategic objectives. And our strategic objective is to become a EU member state by 2028.
When you think about government, often people think about bureaucracy and regulation. You have a very interesting concept, which is around smart regulation, which goes back to the question, how do you involve your customers? What is your entrepreneurial approach to regulation?
As I said, the main advantage of an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur or a business, regardless how large or small it is to go through the customer experience and to make sure that that customer is well served. So the same is in the government. Obviously, in the government, unlike in smaller businesses, because bureaucracy is present in some of the larger businesses. But as we were discussing earlier, we have to be honest. There is no possibility to do without bureaucracy at all. But it doesn't mean that you cannot do it the smart way, particularly that you have now a great enabler, which is digitization. And with the digital platforms, with the integrating various registers that are existing in the government, you have to aim at smoothing the customer experience when interacting with the government. So we have a system here. We have the businesses that get associated in various business associations. And then at the government level, I have the instrument which is called the Economic Council of the Prime Minister. And we collect those problems, ideas, opportunities from the business community, and then making a decision which one of them are part of the governmental action plan. We run a very aggressive in positive terms debureaucratization agenda at eliminating paperwork, reporting, redesigning the business processes of different interactions between the government and the businesses. What we are striving for is also for the older generations, like, for example, pensioners and so on, to use the digital products. For example, even you wanting to apply for the social assistance program during the winter time or something like that, then you still have to apply it online. And we're happy to see that even the older people are making it. Or we are creating the infrastructure that people can use in order to apply digitally to governmental services.
When you talk about digital, does AI already play a big role, or would you say you are at the beginning of this journey?
I must recognize we are at the beginning of this journey. We are now starting to use AI in order to aggregate and to process data related to the traffic, related to mobility, so that we can use this data in policy making, but also in follow-up of the policy making. Now we are consolidating the capacity of our Bureau of Statistics so that, first of all, we use as many data points as possible, but also are creating the so-called data collaborative platforms so that we give the possibility for researchers, for academia, but also for the businesses to use this open data.
Yeah. There's a lot of discussion these days around governments and businesses need to work more together. You mentioned the Economic Council. Do you see this going further, and is it even possible? Because, running a government is very different to running a company.
But look, I think, as I said, I define it as a partnership. Because the government sources its revenue from the performance of the businesses. So this is the common interest for the government to create the opportunities and to create the right regulations, and for the businesses to perform. This is in their DNA, but also to share some of their proceeds through taxes that goes into education, for example, or into medical assistance, which is, consolidating their operations. I think in the field of education, in the field of research, there are many untapped opportunities. I think it's not only in Moldova, but elsewhere as well. And then now we are trying to incentivize the business not only to apply. We have, for example, a program which is called State Aid, which is according to the EU rules, where we have different, for example, programs at giving grants for development, or subsidizing interest rates, or providing guarantees for loans, and so on. But we are encouraging companies also to apply for research projects, so that we gradually increase the value added, and very importantly, the productivity of the operations.
If I was to ask 100 CEOs, would they want to become politician or prime minister, probably one would tell me, yes, I want to. The majority says no, because, it's a very different field. Your private life becomes public and so on. Why were you the one who said, no, I'm going against the general stream. I want to go from business into politics?
Actually, this was a little bit different. It was a couple months before the aggression of Russia in Ukraine. And our President Sandu, whom I know since my experience from the Minister of Interior back in 2012, she identified the need to consolidate the security sector in Moldova. And then back then, she called me to help with this. Sometimes in this situation, you feel that you must do it. You have an obligation toward your country to do it, if you can, of course. And I felt like I can. And then I assumed the role of the National Security Advisor to the President and Secretary of the Supreme Security Council. And I did it in February 22. In a few weeks, the war started. And obviously, my skills, my experience were needed there. And then at a later stage, we agreed that I have to assume also the role of Prime Minister. Again, because we have had to do a number of things at once. And that is, from one side, security. From the other side is promoting the justice reform, from the other side to advance on the European integration. And fourth, I will call it parallel track, is economic recovery under this strain. And if you ask me, how do I choose priority, I have to admit that I don't have that privilege. They have to do four of them, all four of them. And this is how I get into, I'd call prime ministership rather than politics.
And so, I mean, if you were to encourage, others to follow your track, why should they consider a political role or becoming prime minister? I mean, now you've been in it, you've seen it, you've been successful. Why should one consider it?
First of all, as I said, sometimes it's a call that you have to. I mean, you have a moral obligation to step in and help if you can. If you feel you cannot, you say no. But if you feel that you can help, then you should. And this is everyone's call. Now, if somebody starts to like it, maybe this is their way. Maybe they have to allow themselves to discover this field. But I think that there are many things that people can learn from politics. And there are many things that people can learn and use from private business. And you see it's more and more intertwined. It's more and more a necessity for the government and to run like a business and for the business to be responsible like a government.
Yeah. If you were to return to business once you have completed your prime ministership, how would you run a company different, given what you have learned as a prime minister?
Probably I would do more stakeholder engagement with more ability. I would communicate more for strategic reasons. I think I would extend the range of the stakeholders. Because when you're in the public sector, you understand that the stakeholders are much more diverse than you are considering when you are strictly in the private business. So that I would change.
And I guess also, I mean, when you think about crisis, you have been dealing with a crisis now, which is a war that is happening close to you. Odessa is not very far away. Probably an experience you will never have in business. I mean, a tariff war is not comparable to that.
That's true. Normally in business, you don't face this kind of crisis when you have security at stake, when you have peace at stake, when you have this huge increase in energy tariffs, when you have actually the risk of the energy not flowing anymore. And this is affecting not only your small or large business, not only yours, employees and their families, but it can affect the whole countries. And then, yes, you're right. This is not to be experienced normally in business.
When you think about your next step at some point, again, once you have successfully finished your mandate, what's next for you? I mean, there's nothing left, or?
Look, people are not born prime ministers. I think I will continue what I liked to do with the big data. Since I entered the government, and by now this field is completely transformed, I'm excited to resume from where I left and learn and continue my business.
As a government, you've also got to deal with, you mentioned earlier that we need more data, information to really understand the world better. Unfortunately, we live in a society in which there's also a lot of misinformation, and also technology is used to multiply the misinformation. How do you deal with this? Because as a government, you are a prime actor and target, but also in companies, more and more, you need to deal with it. How do you deal in this fragmented world with the misinformation floating around everywhere?
Look, there are two types of information problem. First is too much information, and then sometimes you have to deal and to filter and to understand what information is relevant and what information is not relevant, but to make it sure that you are not omitting something. And then there is misinformation. And here, obviously, there is the traditional way that, look, you have to check it. Or, for example, in the technical parlance, this is called triangulation, right? And then you check the information with the additional sources of information. Then with the experience, you kind of get an intuition of the consistency of the information and the context. You check this consistency and then move forward, researching more. Obviously, This is much more difficult when you are running through a crisis and you have to make decision fast. And then, of course, you pass this consistency check and then move forward.
In government, and it's the same in companies, you also have to deal, and this is linked to the question of misinformation, trust. There is a big lack of trust in our societies because there is lack of trust in institutions, sometimes lack of trust in companies. What is your advice to leaders how to reinstill trust and how to make sure that trust remains a key component?
What we see, it's not anymore the case that you are trusted as an institution. It's not enough to have a title. It's not enough to represent an institution in order to gain trust. So it's a hard work for an individual as a leader to gain the trust. So now the trust is much more personalized rather than institutionalized. And then being honest, being transparent, being explicit, communicating constantly should help gaining trust. And once you are trusted, you should not disappoint. Because to gain trust, to get it, it's a lot of hard work, but it's sufficient that one mistake, one failure to properly communicate, one failure to be honest, and then this trust is gone.
You say you need to communicate constantly. How do you do your communication and that constant communication?
I am constantly present on social media. I try as much as possible to communicate through TV as well. I'm trying to be open when, people ask me, the journalists, the media, but also I quite frequently, actually every week, go throughout the country, talking to the people in the streets, at the bazaars, in the local public administration, talking to the people that are running governmental services in the country. And this is a way for me to learn about the problems, but also for them to listen to the messages that I have to convey.
We're living in a time in which many people speak about the end of globalization. Yet when I listen to you, you depend a lot on other countries, you work a lot with other countries, you're exposed to a lot of international problems. What's your view on this end of globalization?
I think this is a stage, like in a sinusoid, but we all learned that globalization and democracy brings more value. Sometimes in crisis times there is this political pressure and tendency to close, but in a matter of maybe a few years, people realize that this is a lose-lose situation for everyone around. This is why I trust that we will come back to the situation where people will look around and understand that more is better and more means that people can multiply value. It's not a zero-sum game.
When you look at your colleagues in the public, say, that have only been in the public sector, because you are very much of an exception, do you think we invest enough in the education of political leaders? Because, I guess your career in companies, a lot of people have invested in you, have trained in you, which probably is not the same on the political level. Do you think we need more training in political leadership roles as well?
Yes, I think the politics itself should become more entrepreneurial, not short-term oriented, but more entrepreneurial in looking into the value that they are providing to the stakeholders, looking into the optimizing of the processes, looking into combining various resources to achieve synergy, looking into smoother operations between different parts of the government, which are naturally trying to be siloed. And from this perspective, the governments need to become much more entrepreneurial. And obviously, you need to educate people for that, so that you look into the economics of the governmental services. Even though you are providing a subsidy or social assistance, you have to think about, do you target correctly this segment of your stakeholders? Is this the best way to help these people? You see, I'm not speaking now about producing bottom lines. I'm not speaking about producing businesses. I'm speaking how you can have an entrepreneurial approach to what is normally considering social services and assistance. And there is a huge scope of improvement there.
But how would you do this practically? Would you recommend that a politician spends some of his or her time in her career in a company to learn how things work? Or would you advise every minister and every politician to have an economic council like you have, to have the stakeholders that think like this on their side? How would you practically do it?
I think it's enough to be aware of the fact that there is this scope of improvement and that there is this dimension of the activity, and have the proper advisors for that with the business experience or have links to the businesses. And then if you look into this resource and economic approach to the government, then you have all the chances to get the right advices. So not necessarily to go through the business experience.
Yes. Very good. Before we wrap up, I would like to ask you, what is your best advice to be a good leader?
I think leaders are not leaders if they don't lead the empowered people around them. And I think empowering people around you is the most important thing. Second is to stay focused, regardless of the current pressure. And third is to keep your curiosity and learn constantly.
So these three pieces of advice would be the same to your education minister today and the same to your head of research and development years ago when you were running a company? Or would you make a differentiation between what is the leadership advice to a colleague politician versus somebody who works with you in a company?
I think this is consistent regardless where you are.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dorin. It was a fascinating experience. I see a lot of parallels between running a government and running a country versus running a business. And it would really be great if more leaders in business would discover how well-suited a successful CEO could be to also become a very successful prime minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.